artillery preparation, pumped in 2 million rounds of artillery, keeping the area up for 1 week. On the 7th day, the British infantry went in. First day's casualties, 60,000. One day. 60,000 casualties. One day. That went on for, I think, 5 months, and lost over 500,000 troops. Okay, so they figured, well, that didn't work so good, we got to correct it. So in 1917, the Third Battle of Ypres, or Battle of Passchendaele, as the British like to call it, small sectors, right? What they did is they had almost a 2-week artillery preparation, pumped in over 4 million rounds. British infantry went again, they failed once again. What they didn't realize, they tried to actually have a quantitative change and gain success. What they needed was a qualitative change. In other words, they had to do things differently, not just try to do the same way with more emphasis. So why would that fail? Well, think about it. A couple numbers. One, if you're laying in 1 week's artillery preparation, you know, after a couple of days, your adversary is going to get wise that something's happening in that sector of the front. So we can transfer reserves behind the front. Two, because they've had earlier artillery preparations and they know the damage of artillery. What you do is you start dispersing your people in the front. Instead of lying, you start dispersing throughout the front, also place them in bunkers to minimize the effects of artillery. And three, if you're going to be able to conduct one of those barrages, 2 million or 4 million, or these large expenditures of ammunition, the only way you can do that very near the front, you have to build up huge artillery stockings or artillery dumps. Well, that takes time. In the meantime, enemy recce and intelligence activity are going to notice that. So if you're building a certain sector to say, hey, something's going to happen here pretty soon. In other words, it's not too surprising. Quite often. And then the tactics themselves that they use, which we didn't know. I did build up the middle. Very little tactics. So you begin to see that kind of happen. Okay? So now a way out. The rise of so-called infiltration tactics and guerrilla tactics. A French captain by the name of André Lafarge in 1915 wrote a pamphlet as a way of trying to go through these fortifications, which is infiltration tactics. And the Germans captured the pamphlet, plus they were thinking in similar lines, so it acted as a catalyst, and so they started training a lot of troops. And of course, they washed over the West in the spring of 1980. Sometimes they're attributable to a General von Houdier. And the reason why I have a question mark there is he was not an architect of that. He just had to be one of the commanders on the German side who did employ those tactics. At the macro level, attributable to Ludendorff, he did recognize the importance of it, so he did support the whole effort, and rightly so was deemed a macro level architect in that sense. And then another tactic is the guerrilla tactics seen through Lawrence of Arabia, or Peter O'Toole, if you saw the movie. 7 Pillars of Wisdom. You can read the book. In any case, we see he recognized the importance of that kind of thing, but there's even another guy who was probably more adept at it than Lawrence, a guy by the name of Letow Vorbeck, Prussian, down in Germany, East Africa. And with just a few officers and a couple thousand enlisted men and some Africans, he surrendered after Germany did during World War I. He fought off between 200 and 250,000 British troops. And he had 20 or 30 generals arrayed against him. He was only a colonel. And then actually he was getting stronger toward the end. They had to convince him that Germany lost the war.
That in Europe, was that in Africa?
Germany, East Africa. Yeah. Down in Germany, East Africa. And even in the British official accounts, they tend to give him more credit than Lawrence. Not that Lawrence wasn't a successful commander. But remember, Lawrence was being supplied by Allenby in the Middle East, whereas Letow Vorbeck was virtually cut off and was literally living off the British themselves. So we see that kind of thing. Now what I want to do is we're going to look first at the infiltration tactics and guerrilla tactics of the past, which we can do that kind of thing. So now let's look at the infiltration tactics. I'll let you read this, get sort of a feel for it, and then I'll discuss it. This is the one-chart snapshot. But the key point, I'll discuss this, and some of you can come back and do it at part time. But the key point, instead of just trying to destroy people, you use it to disrupt or suppress the defensive. That's one aspect of it, and obscure the assault. So in that sense, you can think of the artillery as being a chain for the following effort to achieve. And look at the second goal. These small teams, instead of these huge formations going through these small little squads. 10, 12, or 14 people. There's little swarms, each one working its way independently forward. They're spaced out laterally and longitudinally. And what they're trying to do is find the gaps or weaknesses in front, trying to flow into it. And then behind them, small battle groups working in behind them, they go through and then try to cave in the local defense areas the Germans have there from the flank and the rear. And then even larger groups, reserves and stronger following echelons, go through those breaches and widen even more, always working flanks and rear, until finally you got what Little Hart likes to call a torrent pouring through the front. But at every level, you're trying to work the guy's vulnerabilities and weaknesses. Now, if you read that, you begin to say, well, my God, that sounds like what Sun Tzu was saying about water going downhill. That's Sun Tzu tactic. But it took to World War I before they could come up with Sun Tzu tactic. He wrote that back in somewhere between 300 and 500 BC, as people say. So we begin to see that kind of thing. And of course, the idea is quite simple. Eruption of many thrusts, not just one thrust. That gets blocked. The other ones don't go through. You're just trying to pour through. And the idea is to break through, envelop, and cause your adversary to cave in. Okay? So we see a different kind of thing. And it raises this point. They may create some vivid images in your mind, but what it really doesn't address or deal with, how the fire and movement schemes work. How you use firepower with movement as a basis in order to gain leverage. So let's give you an insight into that. Here's the key thing. Fire at all levels. Artillery, mortars, machine guns. In other words, you'll have upper level, you have used artillery. Pasted down at the lowest level, you have mortars, machine guns, etc. In any case, the idea is to pin your adversary down. In other words, you're not going to stand up when some guy's spraying the area with an artillery machine gun fire. You're going to get pinned down. Plus, together with gas and smoke, it tends to obscure what's going on. Plus, thereby it tends to cloak the infiltrators' movement. The infiltrators, in the meantime, the way they're working their way forward, instead of these nice, neat, huge formations, are slithering through these small little groupings, swarms, as we call them. Are hard to see too. So you combine all that together, the captured attention, the obscurity, and the indistinct character, they really deny your adversary an opportunity to picture what's taking place. He can't get a good image of what's going on. Well, remember, if you're not oriented, how are you going to make the appropriate decision, take the appropriate actions? You can't. When you're talking about a guy getting a picture in his mind, you're talking about orientation. So you obscure things sufficient enough, he can't get a proper orientation, therefore he can't make the proper decision to take the appropriate action. So what happens, the result's not too surprising. People who had to face that, all of a sudden they said, these people are moving up, coming out of nowhere, and they're being marched off as prisoners. They're totally confused, and they can't figure out even what hit them. Game's over. We've even seen some of those accounts in Vietnam, the guys holding positions, all of a sudden these guys are in behind them, they can't figure out where they came from, and causes all kinds of panic and chaos. It's infiltration. So it's a very different kind of strategy. The key thing is by doing it, you're really, in a sense, screwing up a Zulu. He doesn't get good observations. His orientation's screwed up, his decisions are screwed up, his actions are screwed up. See, it's very difficult. So, we look at it then, what's the essence of the method? You're really trying to cloud and distort your statement to improve your mobility, to avoid get focused effort. You're trying to penetrate his system. Trying to shatter, and of course, mop up the disconnected degree. And the intent's quite simple. You use tactical dispersion, a focused way to gain tactical success, and expand into grand tactical and hopefully strategic, which they didn't get. We'll comment in a minute. Now think about Napoleon. What did he do? He used strategic to gain grand tactical and tactical. Now we're going the opposite. He used tactical to gain grand tactical and strategic. Interesting. Plus Napoleon, what else did he have? He has strategic dispersion followed by a tactical concentration. Here you go, tactical dispersion with strategic focus. So you have two inversions. Why did you have it? Very simple. Firepower. They had to change. They were blowing their people away. And forced them to go this way. The validity of modern weapons. So the implication is quite simple. Small units exploiting tactical dispersion rather than large formations dividing by the principle of concentration. Remember, Napoleon's strategic dispersion followed by tactical concentration. Now you got tactical dispersion with strategic focus or concentration. Just the opposite. By doing that, then you pump up his friction, paralyze him, bring down his system. So it raised an interesting question. Are they rejection of Napoleonic methods, these infiltration methods, or are the application of these methods under possibly a different guise? And of course, the mere fact that I would put that thing after the double dash, I'm suggesting their application under a different guise. Now we can also go back, on this chart we'll answer that 19th century question we hadn't answered before. So if you look at these infiltration fire movement schemes, you can think of them as Napoleon's multi-thrust strategic penetration maneuvers. Remember, he had his units separate divisions pouring to a country's strategic level. Now we're doing it all the way down to squad level. So all I did is fine grain Napoleon's strategic maneuvers down to squad level in order to penetrate a guy's system. And until the rise of infiltration tactics, use of tanks by the Allies, neither the 19th century nor 20th century commanders were able to evolve effective penetration maneuvers. If you don't penetrate the other guy's system, why should he throw the towel in? He won't. Physically, mentally, we're going to get that later on. If you can't penetrate moral, mental, or physical stability, why should he quit? He won't. He shouldn't. I wouldn't. And if he starts getting inside his mind, system, and all things start going to hell, his confidence starts going south. So now, why? Now we answer. Remember, we went back to that question we answered in the 19th century. Why were the 19th century and 20th century commanders unable to evolve effective penetration? The aristocratic tradition, the top-down command and control system, the slavish addiction, the principle of concentration, the drill regulation mindset. You put them all together, what are they? They're an obsession for control. What it is? It's an obsession for control by high-level superiors over low-level subordinates. When you do that, you start restricting imagination, initiative, and adaptability. If you do that, now you can't evolve into new methods because you got all those constraints upon you. You see it, you go back and read the accounts, and you say, God, why didn't these guys change? They're getting blown away. And all they're worrying about is whether they're going to make the line this way or the column this way. And I mean, you talk about the little teeny changes, and they're making something dramatic. They had to do something totally different. They couldn't see it. You people did, eventually did. I might add, even after World War I, we hadn't seen it. The Germans had seen it. It took us a while.
Why did we?
Some people still don't see it. Because they want to, so I got to control those people. If you got them all slithering through a different direction, how do I control them?
Why did we end up winning World War I? The Germans were better at this. Why did we win World War I?
No, I said they succeeded at the tactical and grand tactical, never succeeded at the strategic level. Remember I said it earlier. The methods were good, but they also didn't apply them entirely correctly either. We'll get in that time, not up to that chart yet. So that's a good question. I want to bring in a couple other points, but this is very important. Also, the Germans, remember we used the tanks. They didn't use it for World War I. That helped us a lot too. They tend to neglect it. Just because they got the infiltration tactics right doesn't mean they got a lot of other things right. But I want to bring that point home because we've had trouble being able to adapt down to lower level. And it's not that easy. There's some other things that can get in the way. We have to get some other information. But now, to try to get at your question. Okay, the infiltration tactics, they did succeed down to lower level, but they coupled with ultimate failure at the corps and army level. And the question is, why did that occur? One, Ludendorff violated his own concept because what he started doing, he laid out his plan. When it got hung up, he wanted to go the same direction. He started feeding failure rather than success. Wasn't able to adapt. Now, that's sort of a harsh statement. I'm going to soften it in just a minute. There's some comments that have to be laid in there. Another one, exhaustion of combat teams leading the assault. After they went forward, they didn't replace those teams. They got tired out and the assault withered away. Nowadays, what you do is when you have a assault go in like that, when you're doing that, when one goes so far, then you start rotating the reserves to be the point and back and forth, so you can keep the momentum of the operation going. And then here's another important one. Logistics were too inflexible to support that fluid penetration. We didn't have that gasoline engine at that time, plus those battlefields were all torn up. It was hard to move forward. In other words, to support that effort, so they could exploit those penetrations or even bring up the artillery when they did need it. And the fourth one's a very key point. Communication were too immobile to allow command to quickly identify and reinforce. Let me pinch in on that point. Let's pretend you're a front commander and you do want to use these infiltration tactics where you're going to exploit your adversary's vulnerabilities and weaknesses. Well, first of all, you got to know where they are. Have some feeling where they are so you can do that. Okay, the people who are succeeding know that. Some are going to get hung up, some are going to succeed. You want to teach success, not failure. But then they're going to have to transmit those instructions back to the higher level commanders so he can go through. Well, they didn't have the communication, they could do that too well. If he's got to allocate the forces, he has to know where it is. If he doesn't know, then he can start pumping forces up blind alleys or fully sockets. In other words, you have to have a good bottom-up communication system so the commander at the top side can reallocate or allocate correctly. Because he controls the follow-on forces and the reserves. He depends upon his decision how they're going to be allocated or where they're going to be allocated. When, at the appropriate time. And then finally, the elastic defense. Now, it was initially developed by the Germans, excuse me, the idea was initially French, but it was developed by the Germans and borrowed by the French by Baton, taking the Fourth Drive. The basic idea, rather than trying to defend the terrain, use the terrain as a medium for maneuver. Another term. And so you bend before the assault, move back before the assault, drag the German infantry out from under their artillery, pour your artillery in, and then locally close them off from the flanks and the rear. Remember, I said terrain doesn't fight wars, machines don't fight wars, people don't use their minds. So we get this thing where we always have to defend every foot of the terrain. The terrain doesn't fight. Use the terrain as a medium for maneuver in order to take out the force. It makes no difference whether you're going forward or backwards, as long as you have the initiative and you're realizing your purpose against your adversary. So we see these kind of things. Plus, the U.S. also had entered the war there. That's why one of the reasons why the Germans want to get that drive going before we get over there and bring our force to bear. Okay? Now let's look at guerrilla. Lawrence. He recognized how important support of the population was. Like modern guerrilla. In other words, the medium through which you operate in plus you disguise your own activities. Note this. I use these quotes. Get inside their mind. That's straight from Lawrence. You don't see that often. But I saw it. Well, that's the very thing I'm talking about. Get inside their mind. Put that quote. Another thing. Note this. Be an idea or thing. Drifting about like a gas. That's even more delicate than water. Because it brings out the idea of not only fluidity, but being invisible, inconspicuous, or indistinct. I can't get an image of what you're up to. And then attacking in depth. So in other words, you're doing different areas too. Well, you think about this kind of thing and combine it with attacking should be tip and run, not push and throw. You're in and out, going in every direction on your adversary. Use of the smallest force and quickest time with the furthest place. Well, think about that. If you're doing all these kinds of things, it's like the Mongols. Pretty soon you seem to be everywhere, yet nowhere. They don't know how to cope with it. And his strategy was very simple. War of detachment. And his basic strategy in terms of war of detachment, what he really tried to do, his strategy was to pin the Turks down along the Hejaz Railroad between Medina and Damascus. And the reason why he wanted to pin them down, he wanted to get them to bring in more troops and more supplies to suck up their effort there, because he was a chain for Allenby's cheese, which was a stroke into Palestine. In other words, to free up the resistance against Allenby. In other words, he was holding them by the nose, so Allenby had lesser resistance elsewhere. In this sense, the guerrillas were chained. And you can think of the same thing. Remember what I said about Grant? Grant, in the final drive there, remember, he was holding Lee up near Richmond while Sherman was cascading through the south. So Lee couldn't come to the city. He backed off, we would have got Richmond. Strategic change. So these things are played. Tie off one way in order to stroke in another direction. And note this. Never on the defensive except on accident and error. Here's where many military men make that mistake. They think they're on the defensive because they're moving backwards. Let me preempt myself here. Mao said there were 3 phases to a guerrilla campaign: strategic withdrawal, strategic equilibrium, and strategic offense. But they were all tactical offense, tactical offense, tactical offense. Because what the guerrillas understood, terrain doesn't wage wars, machines don't wage wars, people do it, they use their mind. So his way of depicting whether you're on offense or defense, do I or do I not have the initiative? If I've got the initiative, it makes no difference whether I'm moving forward, backward, or in any direction. I'm on the offense now. It's initiative. Key word. Now we have a principle of war called the offense. You know, the British tried that at the Somme and they blew away 60,000 guys in one day. Now they're starting to modify. Notice lately the Army came out with the principle of initiative instead of offensive. That's correct. Although I tend not to like the principle of war, but nevertheless, going in the right direction. The idea of initiative. Because the guerrillas do understand. Brain doesn't wage war, machines don't wage war, people do and use their mind. So initiative is tied to people. Do I or do I not have it? How do I know when I got the initiative? We can try to do something else. If I'm getting inside my adversary's OODA loop, I got the initiative. If he's getting inside my OODA loop, he's got the initiative. In other words, if I got him so fouled up that he can't make the appropriate decisions or take the proper actions, I'm getting the initiative. Makes no difference what direction I'm moving in. So you can tie all these things together. And of course, the idea behind it, I'd put it a little differently, the actual words that Lawrence used was to extrude the Turks from Arabia. But the techniques that he was using was really just disintegrating even their ability to govern. So then, the impression when you look at this, among others, also Hartz and others, and also he was privy to the critique the German army conducted upon itself, in which they cited 2 ingredients they had to pay more attention to. One, we'll look at each one. First, the Soviet revolutionary strategy, then blitzkrieg, then guerrilla warfare. Let's look at